Welcome to Experiments in Happiness with Michelle Lemus, the podcast for high achieving women who've checked all the boxes but still feel something's missing.
There's this moment I think a lot of high achieving women hit eventually, and it usually doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't look like falling apart. It doesn't look like not functioning. It doesn't even necessarily look like burnout from the outside. A lot of times it looks incredibly normal. It looks like staring at your to-do list and immediately feeling resistance, like seeing one more email come through and wanting to throw your phone across the room, like someone asking you for something small and somehow it feeling enormous. It looks like getting irritated by things you used to handle easily, things that honestly wouldn't have even fazed you a year ago. And then almost immediately after that feeling shows up, you make it mean something about yourself. Why can't I handle this? Other people have more going on than I do. I should be able to manage this. What's wrong with me lately? And because you're capable, because you're responsible, because you're used to figuring things out, you push through it again. You answer the email, you make the appointment, you solve the problem, you handle the thing again. And honestly, for a long time, I thought exhaustion worked like math. I thought if I was tired, it meant I was simply doing too much. Too many tasks, too many obligations, too many responsibilities. And sometimes that is true. But I started realizing there are women carrying objectively full lives who still feel emotionally okay. And there are women carrying lives that don't even look that overwhelming on paper, who feel absolutely crushed by them. And I started asking myself why, because I don't actually think the to do list is the full story. I think a lot of women are exhausted for a completely different reason, not because of what they're doing, but because of what they're emotionally carrying while they do it. And that's different because you're not just answering emails. You're managing whether people are disappointed in you. You're not just helping someone. You're managing guilt. You're not just saying yes to a responsibility. You're managing your identity, whether people see you as helpful, reliable, nice, easygoing, strong, dependable. And that creates a completely different level of exhaustion. I don't think most women realize how much of their energy is spent emotionally managing the world around them. And the hard part is, a lot of us got rewarded for it. You become the dependable one, the calm one, the capable one, the person everybody can count on. And at first, that feels good. It feels validating. People trust you, people need you, people appreciate you. But over time, something starts happening. You slowly become emotionally responsible for everything, for everybody, for whether people are comfortable, whether they're upset, whether they're disappointed, whether things run smoothly, whether everybody's okay. And because you've handled it for so long, nobody questions it anymore, including you. You just start assuming it's yours. And I think that's where a lot of women lose themselves. Not because they're weak, not because they aren't grateful, not because they can't handle life, but because they've been carrying emotional weight that was never supposed to belong to them in the first place. I was thinking about this recently because I noticed how often women say they're overwhelmed when technically the task itself isn't even that big. And I don't mean that dismissively, I mean genuinely. Like sometimes the actual task takes 10 minutes, but it feels heavy for hours. Why? Because the task isn't the only thing happening. The emotional management attached to it is what's draining. For example, someone asks you for a favor, and immediately your brain starts doing all this invisible work. If I say no, will they be upset? Will they think I'm selfish? Am I being difficult? What if they really need me? What kind of person says no to this? And now suddenly the exhaustion isn't coming from the actual favor. It's coming from carrying the emotional weight of everybody's potential reaction. That's exhausting. And I think a lot of high achieving women, especially, have become experts at carrying invisible emotional loads. Because high achieving women are often praised for self sacrifice, for being everything to everyone, for holding it all together, and eventually you become so good at overfunctioning that people stop realizing how much it costs you. Sometimes you stop realizing too. You just think, this is adulthood. This is success. This is what responsible women do. but I don't think we're supposed to feel emotionally responsible for everybody all the time. And honestly, I think resentment is often the first clue. Not because you're a bad person, not because you don't love people, but because resentment usually shows up when there's a gap between what you genuinely want to give and what you feel emotionally pressured to give. That's important because I think a lot of women judge themselves for resentment instead of listening to it. But resentment is information. It tells you something feels imbalanced. It tells you something inside you knows. I cannot keep carrying this level of responsibility for everybody. And I think one of the hardest realizations for women like us is understanding that being capable does not automatically make something your responsibility. That one took me a while because capable women become default women. If you can do it, you often end up doing it. At work, at home, in friendships, in relationships, in family dynamics, you become the planner, the fixer, the rememberer, the emotional support system, the problem solver, and eventually you wake up exhausted. Not because you're failing, but because you've become infrastructure for everybody else's life. And I think a lot of women listening to this are going to recognize that immediately because you can feel it. You can feel when your entire life starts revolving around preventing inconvenience for everybody else. And what's interesting is a lot of this happens without conscious decisions. It becomes automatic. Someone needs help. You step in. Someone's upset. You manage it. Someone forgot something. You fix it. Someone creates urgency. You absorb it. And over time, you stop checking whether something is actually yours before picking it up emotionally. You just grab it automatically. I think that's why so many women feel exhausted even during seasons that technically should feel manageable because it's not just the visible responsibilities. It's the invisible emotional labor attached to every single thing. And I really started noticing this when I would feel immediate resistance to tiny things, like an email or a phone call or someone asking me for one more thing. And I kept thinking, why does this feel so heavy? Because logically, it shouldn't. And eventually I realized I wasn't resisting the task. I was resisting the emotional weight attached to the task, the expectation, the obligation, the pressure, the emotional management. That's what I was tired of. And once I started noticing that, it changed a lot for me because I stopped assuming overwhelm automatically meant I need to become more productive. Honestly, I think a lot of women are trying to solve emotional overload with productivity systems, new planners, better routines, more discipline, more optimization. And again, sometimes systems help. But if the real issue is emotional over responsibility, no planner is going to fix that because the problem isn't efficiency. The problem is ownership. You're carrying things that do not belong to you emotionally. And I think one of the biggest mindset shifts for me was realizing I am allowed to let other adults have their own feelings. That sounds simple. But I think a lot of women genuinely do not believe that. I think a lot of women believe they are responsible for preventing disappointment, preventing discomfort, preventing frustration, preventing inconvenience. And that's a massive amount of emotional pressure to live under constantly, especially because it's impossible. You cannot build a life where nobody is ever disappointed in you. You just can't. And honestly, the women who try the hardest usually end up the most exhausted because they spend their entire lives shape-shifting to maintain emotional equilibrium for everybody else. And eventually, there's nothing left for them. I think that's why so many women say things like, I don't even know who I am anymore, because they've spent so long becoming who everybody else needed. And I don't think the solution is becoming selfish. I really don't. I think the solution is becoming intentional, learning the difference between I genuinely want to give this and I feel emotionally required to carry this. Those are not the same thing. And honestly, sometimes the most life-changing thing you can do is pause. Just pause before immediately saying yes, because a lot of women never even give themselves space to check what they actually want. The request comes in, and the answer is automatic. Yes, of course. No problem. I'll handle it. Meanwhile, internally, they're drowning. And I think one of the simplest but most powerful things women can start practicing is delaying their response. Not because you're manipulative, not because you're difficult, but because you deserve space to decide things from clarity instead of pressure. I think, let me think about that is one of the healthiest phrases women can learn because it interrupts autopilot. It creates space between the request and the emotional reflex. And inside that space, you can finally ask yourself, do I actually want to carry this? Or have I just been trained to? That's a very different question. And honestly, sometimes when you start doing this, you realize how much of your overwhelm was never actually mandatory. It was assumed responsibility, emotional responsibility, identity responsibility. And when you start putting some of that down, you don't just feel less overwhelmed, you feel lighter, calmer, more present, more like yourself again. Because I really don't think most women need to get it together. I think a lot of women need permission to stop carrying everything. And maybe that's the experiment this week. Not becoming more productive, not trying harder, not squeezing more out of yourself, just asking, is this actually mine to carry? And being honest with yourself about the answer.
Thanks for listening to Experiments in Happiness. You can find more tools and resources at experimentsinhappiness.com.